Hi, everyone. Today we've got Claudio Cericola on. Claudio works at Canaccord Genuity in their diversifieds group. So we're going to get some insights into that, and we hope you enjoy.
Did you get this job then just through online application?
I didn't know anyone before I started networking. It was mainly just reaching out to people and like specifically analysts at the firm. And I had a talk with one of the analysts who was on the team before, and she just like got me onto the team. And I can talk about my recruiting process now, I guess. Um, so she vetted for me to go to what their first round essentially was like a meet and greet, and it wasn't really an interview process, but they got everyone into the Toronto office, like catered and had food and drinks for everyone. And it was just like networking with investment banking, equity research, and I think wealth management as well, like basically their full capital markets team. And that was a way to like get to know people and was a real entry into the first round. And then, yeah, there was like a first round, which was mainly technicals with a VP and associate. And then after that, straight to the super day, which was, I think, 3 interviews back to back to back. So,
Can you walk us through the super day? Like, I feel like that's such a term that's thrown around so often, but what does it look like? Like, you come into the office, like you have 3 interviews. Like, tell us about like how those interviews varied, how many people were in each.
so typically, like a super day, just like the final round for a firm, for like a firm's interview process. And a lot of firms try to mix between like more junior employees and more senior employees to get like a mix of what people go through. And by that point, they've probably vetted you to go past like their technical check in the earlier rounds. And so for CG specifically, in my year, it was initially like a first round in the super day with an associate and I think a VP, associate and VP, and then it went straight to a one-on-one interview with the director. And there was supposed to be another round, but people couldn't make it. And at the time, I think it was the head of banking was supposed to interview me as well, which would have been intimidating, but he wasn't able to make it out. So, and yeah, the first round was a lot more technical than the second round of the super day, which was more behavioral, trying to get to know you and your general interest in finance and to see if you'd be willing to stay for the firm for a very long time, where like a lot of other firms are more like two and out. It's more of a, stay here for your whole career kind of thing. So they want to make sure like you're going to be there for a very long time. And that was typically what that super day was all about. And happily, and after that, there was a cocktail reception at a bar in Toronto. Not really a bar, it was a restaurant. And again, just trying to get to know the team because they really do care about culture and how you mesh with the people there. So that was how my process went. And like I know a lot of firms are very different, but yeah.
At this point, you go to this cocktail hour and you're meeting everyone in wealth management and across capital markets. And I assume by this point you knew already you wanted investment banking, right? What was it about investment banking that drew your attention?
Um, Personally, investment banking is cool for me because like it all stems down to like why I wanted to do this job in the first place, which is like my interest in like general M&A. And like as a kid, my dad sold his business and I saw him like go through that. And I realized that's what I wanted to do. I like the fast paced nature, like the deal aspect of it. So I realized that, well, to be honest, like it pays very well. But also you get a sense of like a lot of transactions that shape the career, like the path of a company's life cycle, and like being able to touch on that and actually making some value in that transaction is pretty cool to me. And which is why I like M&A as a whole. Yeah, I realized like wealth wasn't really for me because like it's very cool, but I really like that deal aspect. And equity research is very like report heavy analytical sense, and I feel like in that role you won't get the person to person transaction aspect as you would in an investment banking role. So that kind of was my deciding factor into like pursuing IB more intensely.
Had you explored like hedge funds, sales and trading?
Yeah, I realized I wasn't really interested in hedge funds or like sales and trading, to be honest, given like the fast like pretty accelerated timelines of IB. I didn't even look into it really because like it would have been recruiting like almost a year, like 6 months later.
Yeah, already.
Yeah, exactly. So like maybe if recruiting went a little different, maybe, but I didn't really touch on any hedge funds because I'm not a big fan of stocks. Just wasn't really my interest. I'm more interested in like the transaction nature. Um, but yeah, like investing is really cool. But again, I feel like in IB you get that like it's pretty much a sales role at the senior level, which is what like eventually I'm striving to be. And just like that person to person again is something you really don't unless you're dealing with like LPs or like investors in your funds. You're not really getting that kind of thing. So again, I just really like the sales aspect of banking. It's something that really attracts me.
So that's something I was interested in looking at your LinkedIn specifically is that there's generally this trend of investment banking to private equity. And it seems like you reversed that. Yeah. You went private equity to investment banking. And I'm just thinking, A, like, why leave private equity? And B, do you see the skills you learned in private equity transfer over to investment banking?
So the roles I did I mean, I can touch on that now. In my first year summer, I worked at a search fund, which is essentially an investment vehicle to first one operator or like a few operators to acquire a company. Um, and in that role, I predominantly was just sourcing companies for the guy. So I didn't really get much like skills and knowledge that I could really transfer. But mainly a lot of first years and second year students use these roles to eventually get your investment banking job. And luckily in my second year, I worked at a family office and it was a few partners buying a few companies. So it was like a pseudo private equity firm, just everyone's investing their own capital, no LPs, which is just a limited partner. Um, so yeah, I got a taste of more with the transaction aspect in that. And to be honest, in those roles, like private equity is something I've definitely considered in the past. It's very similar in banking for like a variety of reasons, but um, again, it's very risky. You're really putting a lot of your money in the line and your reputation and everything you do, which is something I'm not really interested in. I'd rather be an advisor. Um, so yeah, that's personally for me like the main reason why I'd even consider it.
For sure, I'm kind of looking at the same thing myself. Like I'm looking to do investment banking as well, and I definitely have that thought in my head of private equity always as an option later on. It is more risky, which is why I was thinking as well. Let's get the foundational skills in, and then can look to transfer out. That's pretty interesting. When you say sourcing companies in a search fund, what exactly does that mean? Is that just like
So I was just finding companies I was finding companies online through like a variety of resources, like industry databases, like different conferences they would have in each industry. And I would compile an Excel document and include like a little bit of like an email in that as well for the head of the fund to then send to these companies. And this is just a way for them to reach out to companies they would acquire. So in the search fund model specifically, there's two main ways. It's rather like proprietary. By this way, they find their own companies to look into, or there's also direct inbounds from investment banks who are selling these companies directly to these like these search funds. So yeah, I was just helping on that part of the sourcing process, which is just finding companies.
And then is a search fund then is that related to a private equity or what's their role in like doing a transaction?
So it's essentially just a type of private equity firm. And it's just a guy probably has some sort of equity in the company. And for example, like the guy I worked for, he was in investment banking prior and he really wanted to be an entrepreneur somehow. And he thought this was a great way to enter like entrepreneurship through acquisition. Um, just so it's like less risk. You can buy an established company that has like these stable cash flows that it sort of combines your typical private equity investment where you're kind of selling off after 5 years into more of like an entrepreneurship thing you're holding for a longer holding period that you can really get to know the people and grow it like your traditional mom and pop shop. Or it really depends on the strategy, but this is what this guy's idea was about. So, I mean, that was my experience at least. But
I assume though, like the search fund isn't strictly just for private equities. Like venture capitals have to have search funds as well, and things, or they have a different process then.
I think it would be considered something else. I could be wrong, but from my understanding, like search funds are like one or a few people just trying to buy a company like all out. But there could be, if there would be like a venture capital, I don't think it'd be called a search fund. I think it'd be like different. I think it'd be a venture capital, growth equity.
It's also interesting. So I see there is a trend right now of take privates, and I assume that this relates to a lot of private equity. Keeps you in the news, like a private equity firm buys a company, takes private. From your understanding, why is there this trend of take private as opposed to IPOs? Or is that just something that happens when a private equity firm buys a company?
I think the trend right now from these take privates is really because like equity is quite expensive. So a lot of companies find it very valuable to buy out their remaining public equities and just operate as a private company. And that's even more favorable now with interest rates coming lower. But from a traditional private equity standpoint, I think there's a lot of exit strategies. Like private equity you could IPO, or you could even sell to another private equity firm, which a lot of them do. And for example, if like you're a middle market firm, you just sell up market. But yeah, I'm not too sure about this specific trend at the moment, but that's like the best answer I'd give.
No, it is interesting, and I was assuming pretty similar to what you're saying, especially like it just seems like the economy right now is probably pretty expensive to be public.
Exactly, yeah.
So just kind of reversing that, take private would make sense. What exactly is diversified?
That's a great question. Yeah. So Canaccord's diversified team is pretty unique in the sense that we work on M&A, a little bit of ECM, and restructuring, and we pretty much do everything except metals and mining, which we have a full separate team for that. But we really tackle everything that's trending at the moment. For example, in 2021, when cannabis was really booming, Canaccord realized that the big banks couldn't really compete in the space because there's too much red tape surrounding the market. So they really took over and become industry leaders in that. And they've really tried to go towards whatever's hot. So at the moment, it's a lot of things. There's not really like one specific thing that they're focusing on, but we do have a little bit of tech with like a lot of companies, unfortunately, a lot of restructuring as well, which is good for us, but maybe bad for them. But yeah, also ECM has been pretty quiet, so it's been a lot of M&A and restructuring. But yeah, we are really trying to grow into everything, and tech is something that Canaccord is really trying to grow into. Which is pretty cool. Like our new head of investment banking was a previous head of technology, so it's clear that probably pivoting towards that. But not too sure about the exact strategy of the firm. But yeah, they're pretty much tech is something that's pretty hot at the moment for sure.
Do they tend to focus on deals within like Canada rather than trying to compete in the US?
For sure, yeah. We do have a lot of US offices who would focus on the more middle market space in the US, but our Toronto office would definitely focus on a lot of Canadian deals. I mean, there will be some cross-border transactions that would occur in our office, but pretty much it's going to be a lot of Canadian. Or if we do, for example, like cannabis, we would venture out, and since the Toronto office is that hub for that, we would work on a lot of US deals in that. But yeah, pretty much a lot of Toronto deals.
And what are your thoughts? Like we just saw Donald Trump get elected, probably going to be a little bit more protectionist in the States in terms of just everything. What are your thoughts generally on what's going to happen in the Canadian space because of that?
No, great question. It really boils down to like if there's going to be like the tariffs that Trump is really proposing or not. Because if there would be like some moderate tariffs towards Canada and even Mexico, that would impact Canada as a whole, really. But again, there's been talks of like free trade agreements being renegotiated. So if those free trade agreements would come into play, that would definitely help Canadian markets and allow us to continue trading with the US a lot. But yeah, it really depends. Like there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment, even though the equity markets are booming. So, but yeah, it really depends. But it could, I mean, for CG specifically, like it would impact like, cannabis regulation in the US. If that would get legalized, that'd be very great for us. But yeah.
I was wondering if to touch on a little bit of what the day in a life of an investment banker looks like.
Okay, yeah. So it really depends on like what firm, but I can give my like my example as a summer analyst. So it'd pretty much be coming in the office at around 9, and you walk in, you pretty much check your emails. There could be like a morning meeting, but you're pretty much doing like some form of long-term project you've been assigned, and you check in any calls you have during the day. So between like 9 and 12, you're pretty much doing that and working on any deals you're on. And then around 12, you get lunch, come back, pretty much work some more until around 4 to 5. And around this point is, I'd say the mornings are more call and the afternoons are more call oriented. But the afternoon is when you really take deep dives into like whatever model or presentation you're working on, and you really grind through it with whatever analyst and associate is really on your team, even VP sometimes. So I'd say that's a typical afternoon, and then you get your dinner, Ubered in, or you go pick up somewhere, and you pretty much work until you're done your task for the day, which can be late or early, just depending on how much work you got done and how urgent it is and what team you're on. So yeah, I would say that's my day in life. It can vary a lot. Like we've had some pretty cool, like you have like investor call one day, and then you have like a pitch one day where you're helping your team like print all the documents they need for the presentation so they can go pitch to a client, which is pretty cool to help out on. But banking is very variable in the sense that there's always something different happening. So your day is going to be completely different, which it's something I enjoy. Like you don't know what you're going to get until you go to bed that day. So yeah, that was my experience. But I'm sure other people in other firms are a lot different in the sense that maybe they'll go home earlier and work from home. Even me, like this could be a crazy take, but I'd rather work in the office at night than work in my house. I feel like I associate my apartment or house as like a resting spot, and my work is like, you're gonna grind it out here. So I actually would prefer, even on the weekends when I had work to do, I would come into the office and work there. But I could be a weirdo for that. I don't know.
No, there's a lot to be said about like the environment and like what you do and like how it like triggers and works with your brain in terms of like association, like of like, oh, I'm in my like suit, therefore I'm like working. I'm in the office, I'm working. I just had a coffee, I need to do something. Like I didn't just have a coffee to then like sit down and like rot and do nothing. You know what I mean?
No,
like yeah.
It affected my sleep so much. I used to work in my bed.
Yeah.
And then realizing like I was like I thought I had insomnia. I was like, what the hell's going on? I talked with my parents, and we figured out like just you got to separate the environment. And as soon as taking the work, even outside of my room, it was first just to my desk, but then it was outside in my room, and that made a huge difference. Now I can go to bed much easier.
No, of course. Even like there'd be times where I'll be even at school. Like I always like going to the library and stuff. I feel like if I study in my room, whenever I come home, not like rested, I'm like, oh, there's always something else I got to do. But if I finish all the stuff I got to do at school, like wherever I'm studying, and then I come home, like, okay, now I can like sit down, like, watch a sports game, like actually chill. Whereas, yeah, it's just hard to like really just relax. So, but yeah, a lot of people have different opinions on that. I know a lot of people like working from home. I'm against it, but I know why a lot of people like working at home is like, you do waste a lot of time transiting and all that stuff.
But you realize that you only really talk to people when you're remote, when you're doing a task with them. So it's difficult to build, a good connection, rapport with them when you're just kind of talking for what you need. Whereas when you're in person, you can have those like water cooler conversations and much better make like tangible, good connections with people.
But I even like found over the summer when you work, I mean, this is really banking related, but if you work late on a project together with your associate analyst, you get really close to each other because everyone's tired. Everyone's like wants to work hard towards it. And like a lot of funny conversations come out of that. And like, honestly, like the best of the worst times in a sense that, you're actually getting to know these people pretty well and you build connections that way. And I feel like if you're at home texting each other through Teams, you're not building that connection at all, which kind of sucks. And again, like work is a lot faster if everyone's together. So I enjoyed parts of it for sure. But
Oh, that's all. That's awesome. Another thing I'm thinking of investment banking is kind of crazy how each role, I feel like as you progress through your career, is so different to the one you're just in before. And I feel like a lot of investment bankers, when they think of the job, they kind of like essentially what the MD does. They like that selling aspect where you don't really get there till you're an MD. And I'm just wondering, I feel like the VP role is very different dependent on firm. The firm I was at, he was more of an advisory role, so he didn't really do any of the slide decks. I'm wondering, at a firm like yours, and from your understanding, at what point do you start doing the selling, and what years are you just grinding out all these decks that you're doing like when you're an intern and an analyst?
okay, so just for like context, at Canaccord, you have an analyst, associate, VP, director, and MD. I know a lot of firms have different names for them, but that's the hierarchy. And some are analysts at the very bottom if you want to include those as well. So a VP at Canaccord, it really, one, depends how senior they are, and two, depends on the responsibility they want to take on. I know a lot of VPs like to get in the weeds into the models, and others not as much. And I think it just comes down to the responsibility they want to take on. But yeah, I think in terms of like sales aspect, it's very much the directors and pretty much the MDs doing a lot of that. Once you hit director, you're really not touching the models uh, or PowerPoints unless you really want to. I know there's one MD in particular who does like looking over the models himself, and he's really good at it. Like pretty much one of the smartest guys I've ever met. But yeah, pretty much as a VP, you're telling the analyst and associate what to do, giving timelines, giving guidance, and here and there helping out with the PowerPoint model. But it's more of like the orchestrator of the whole pitch building or model building process.
Are they doing any of the pitching themselves though?
So I didn't sit in on an actual pitch. I would assume it's more the MDs and directors doing that. I mean, it really depends on how many people are on the deal. There's been deal teams where there's like 4 people on it, probably like MD, director, and then VP, then maybe an associate or 2, an analyst or something like that. They may have more of a pitching role, but I feel like the pitching role really comes when you're at the director level and you're trying to bring in clients of your own. And that's when the sales aspect really comes, because a lot of your compensation will be based on commission, in a sense that if you bring a lot of deals, you will get paid a lot more. So there's much more of an incentive for a director to really do the sales role versus a VP who's just, gets their bonus in the year. I don't think they're really going to put in the extra effort when they're working long hours already. So that's at least that's my experience at Canaccord. But yeah, they're not really selling that much, which kind of sucks, right? That's what like all like analysts that want to stay in banking want to do eventually, is that selling role, which you don't get much of. Well, you may, it depends on what you do, and if you bring your own client, like good on you, but typically not.
What I've heard is it's like, you're a summer, or like let's say you're an analyst, you're not really supposed to be going and having like direct conversations with MDs and directors. Would you say that hierarchical, like kind of like connotation that surrounds banking, would you say that holds true? Like if you need something done, it's like you're asking your associate or your VP, and then they're like a middleman kind of bridging that?
When it comes to like work deliverables, 100%. Like if you have a question, you pretty much first ask like an intern or another analyst, like, hey, like what do I do here? So when it comes to work, yeah, for sure. But in terms of like reaching out to them for like, at least at Canaccord, they're really open. They're really work like helping you in term like whatever you want. They'd be willing to chat, unless of course if they're busy, maybe not. But they're really nice in the sense that you could, for example, I had a question for one of the things I was on, and I asked my VP, and the VP is like, "Oh, just go ask the director." So I went out over there. It was kind of intimidating, but asked him a question about what I was working on. We had a pretty long discussion about it too. So yeah, I've heard other firms are much more, leave the directors alone, just focus on the juniors. But at least at CG, there was no like offices, so like everyone's on the same floor. So it's a lot easier in a sense that you're not knocking on someone's door or like trying to get in. You're just walking over to their desk, just like giving them a wave and talking, which helps a lot for sure, especially as like a summer analyst going into that.
You clearly have a passion for investment banking. If you were to do this whole thing over again, from first year, could even go back to grade 12, what steps would you take moving forward?
So yeah, if you're really interested in finance, I'd really study in your first year university. Enjoy your like summer after high school, but please don't do anything finance related. But in your first year of university, I'd really, even during your first year of school, I would try getting some form of finance related role. And typically these firms would hire in an unstructured process where it's mainly just cold outreach through like emailing these partners of these smaller firms who don't really hire interns through like a typical interview portal, but they need people. So getting these roles is good because one, it shows you're interested in finance.
Do you have a list of these small firms, or like some way that you would go about finding like what firms might be doing that process versus a more formal one?
So there's a website called Search Funder. I can send you guys the links. There's also, I'm blanking on the name, but there's another website where it shows a lot of search funds in whatever geography you're looking at. I think search funds are a tried and true way of getting some sort of finance experience in your first year, but you can also reach out to like wealth management, any finance related role that seems like there's not a structured process, because it's a lot harder to get a job as a first year. So in my first year, I think I did all I could, maybe get higher grades, because your grades do matter. So yeah, my first year I do that. In second year recruiting, it gets more into some structured processes. Like at IB, for example, there's firms like Altus Partners who hire structured process, and they want people in their second year going there. So trying to get one of these big name jobs would be very, very good because they're brand names and you're getting great experience. But if you're not able to, it's not a problem. You can also still go for these search fund jobs in your second year. Just try to have some sort of different role. Maybe don't work at the same search fund, or try to spin it like you're doing something else. And then after that, in pretty much you're probably going to be recruiting for your second year and third year job at the same time. At least I was. In third year recruiting, I would really focus on networking. I can't stress enough how much that matters. Technical prep is good and you should know your stuff, but you really can't get an interview if you don't like network enough.